Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Channel 7 News. I'm your host, Adam Corcoran.
And I'm Brendan Inchetta. Tonight, we begin with a very special broadcast for you.
Oh, so they tell the good anchor about the special broadcast tonight? I get it, guys.
Yes, maybe if you showed up to the pre-show meeting like your job today, you would have known about this.
So I miss one meeting.
Anyways, back on topic, we'll be covering all going on in the world of medieval entertainment.
Oh yes, I see the script here. Tonight we'll be covering medieval theater, games and festivals for common folk and royals, finally sports and tournaments.
To begin tonight's show, we go to Lexi to talk all about medieval theater.
Thanks, Brendan, and thank you for joining us tonight. Theater at this time was not just plays, but more broad performances, including dancers, mimes, acrobats, animal trainers, and storytellers. Though at this time, it mainly centered around religious expression. Fun fact, the Greeks actually used to put on plays to appease Dionysus. But anyways, theater during this time was often an expression of religion. There were mainly two types of theater though, literary and popular. Oftentimes they went hand in hand as literary theater became popular. Popular theater though included folk theater. Examples of folk theater included plays like Plough Monday, in which there would be a decorated plough that would get pulled around the fields, supposedly carrying a fertility god to help the crops grow well. In another play called The Wild Man of the Woods, a figure would dress up covered in dirt and leaves and such, and then be hunted and killed, symbolizing the coming winter. Folk theater served a purpose to the community as it provided styles and concepts that people were fairly familiar with, but slowly introducing new ideas as it went. And as theater progressed, plays including lots of miming would be put on and became popularized. Oftentimes plays would consist of a choreographed fight scene in which the loser would then have to be revived by a healer. This symbolized death and rebirth. Later on, these choreographed fight scenes would be given characters and more of a structured plot. For example, St. George fighting a dragon was one of their main plays. At this time though, dialogue was introduced to balance out the action on stage. As well as theater progressed, Christianity flourished and became widespread across Europe. So in turn, theater also had to keep up with that. Their representation of death and rebirth from the previous plays was soon turned into Christ's resurrection and death and resurrection. The performers that put on these shows though could be hired by the nobility to perform at their gatherings in their houses and were basically on call at any given time. This just in, a 10th century manuscript of an early play was found in Switzerland at the monastery of St. Gall. According to our sources, the play consists of a biblical scene of the 3 visits by Mary to Jesus' tomb. Apparently there was a choir incorporated, half of which the people involved were supposedly representing the angel who greets Mary upon her arrival. Well, what an exciting way to end our segment. Incredible, honestly. I'm Lexi, and this has been Theater in the Medieval Period. Back to you, Adam.
Thank you for that. Now, moving on, we will be going to Daniel, who will be talking about games and festivals for the common folk.
Thanks for calling me in, Adam. I'm Daniel. I'll be talking to you today about entertainment for the common folk. Now, entertainment for the common folk spans a very large assortment of activities. For the more social events, feasts, fairs, and festivals were held on very specific dates annually to give the normies something to look forward to in their horribly mundane common lives. The cities and villages would be filled with boisterous activity. Dancing filled the streets, there was singing to be heard. Masked dancers known as mummers could be seen bringing entertainment to festivals and putting children in therapy for years. Minstrels and troubadours would travel through towns and sing to the people as well. Minstrels typically singing legends and wives' tales, while troubadours took a more mushy romantic route, singing of courtly love. Isn't that nice? Jugglers filled the streets as well because all birthday party jobs had already been seen juggling, so they used tricks and deception as well in their acts. Just be careful who you trick. These people loved to party so much that they came up with a reason for debauchery once a month. Their end of October tradition wasn't yet Halloween, but St. Crispin Day, celebrated on October 25th. I remember my first St. Crispin Day. My dad took me aback, started a bonfire with my bicycle, and chanted praise to St. Crispin. Gone are those days. Halloween was still around, however, and is known as All Hallows Eve, the Day of the Dead, and this was celebrated on November 2nd. Other ways that people had fun were by playing many types of games. Games such as chess and dice were played, as well as shovelboard, the ancestor to shuffleboard, which you might be familiar with if you've ever been on a cruise and seen old people pushing discs across a board with sticks. Another common game they would use to pass the time is a game called tables. If that doesn't sound familiar to you, it was their version of backgammon. If that also doesn't sound familiar to you, and let's be real, why would it? It's a game where two players had 15 pieces which moved between 24 triangles according to the roll of those two dice. Well, I've got a round now. I'll bring it back to you, Adam.
Thank you. Now, moving on, we'll be going to Cam, who will be talking about entertainment for the Royals.
Tonight I am reporting from the King's Court in your local gymnasium, and I'll share with you the many things that the royalty and rich do for fun around here. The most well-recognized act are the jesters and minstrels. Jesters were essentially medieval clowns that would try to brighten someone's day by telling jokes or acting silly, while minstrels were bards that would play music in the court. When the mood wasn't right for a jester, then the lords would have someone read to them. These passages could include holy scriptures, or accomplishments of the Romans, or even thoughts of philosophers throughout history. Another favorite was to have great feasts or parties and invite the rich and famous of the town for an evening of fun. Other hobbies included gardening, horseback riding, and hunting. Now back to you.
Thank you for that. Moving on, we're going back to Cam again to talk about sports during medieval times.
It was a busy day in sports today with many games on the agenda. In the local archery contest, a man by the name of Robin Hood won, outshooting his competition in a great display of accuracy. Peter McElroy won today's round of golf being the earlier version of golf. The game of horseshoes was won by an unknown man after throwing the horseshoes around the pole time and time again. He fled the scene without claiming his prize, however. No horses were harmed during this game. Wrestling this year was dominated by Dan "The Rock" Jackson. Everyone joined Dan in a feast after smelling what The Rock was cooking. That concludes our sports section for the evening. Back to you.
That was very entertaining. Finally, for our last segment, we go to Joe to talk about tournaments.
So what do you think about Steve?
I can't stand that guy. Anyways, sorry about that. And thank you for that lovely, warm introduction. I very much appreciate it. Just here to talk to you briefly about tournaments. The word tournament, of course, comes from an old French word that, for whatever reason, means a whale's vagina.
Sweetheart, I'm pretty sure it means to joust or to tilt.
Yeah, what? I don't think so. I'm trying to do my schoolwork here. Just look this up on Wikipedia. Anyways, first known use of the word was around 1114 by a man named Count Baldwin III. He used it to refer to frequent javelin sports, tournaments, and such like. This was adopted as an English term tourney by the Anglo-Normans by 1300. Tournament origins likely date back to the Carolingian Empire, where military cavalry games were central to military training. There's records dating to Worms in 843 of military games followed by a melee by all combatants. As early as the 9th and 10th century, knightly tournaments had begun. By the 12th century, a standard form of tournaments had emerged. They'd be held at all times during the year with the exception of Lent, and would generally take place on Monday or Tuesday, probably because that's when the drinks were the cheapest at the pubs. However, any day would be acceptable except for Friday or Sunday, so really not any day. Knights would often arrive in companies and stay in one of two settlements. The tournaments would be held outside of the settlements, where stands were erected for both for spectators. Patrons often held lavish banquets and offered prizes for the best knights on both sides. Tournaments would consist mostly of melee and jousting. Melees were a general fight where knights were divided into two sides, but could also be held as a free-for-all or every man for himself type event. Of course, knights would either be on horseback or fight on foot. The battles would spread for several square kilometers between the two encampments. The intent was to capture the opposing knights to ransom them. This would last until all the knights had either surrendered, had been captured, both sides were exhausted until light faded. So ransoming knights was actually a pretty profitable thing for these guys to do. On the other hand, jousting was a single combat sport of two knights. So they would ride at each other and would try and knock each other off with lances. Jousting was initially not a main feature of tournaments, and at times they actually banned it because they were thought to be distracting to the main events for the knights themselves. So this changed around the 13th or 14th century, and jousting popularity began to grow. So eventually this led to jousting as a main event or even the sole event a lot of the times. So tournaments were immensely popular, not only with spectators but with knights as well. So one tournament in Langley-sur-Marne, pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, was for the coronation of Louis VIII's son, and it actually had over 3,000 knights in attendance. Just on a quick side note, for my coronation, my father also had individuals battle for me. It was on a football screen though, so it wasn't nearly as special, but I'm sure he still loved me all the same. So in spite of the popularity, Pope Innocent II, as well as a bunch of other royals, decided that they wanted to have these things banned. And that happened in 1130. It only lasted roughly about 40 or 50 years. But during this time, they actually refused to have proper Christian burials for knights that were killed during this. They accused knights of unarmed, violence against unarmed individuals. And really, that's about it. You know, that's the tournaments in a nutshell. Thank you very much.